So last time we left off by actually giving our player the ability to kill the enemy and the enemy the ability to kill the player. Now nothing really happened after that, so what I'm going to be showing you this time is this here, where if an enemy actually goes and kills a player, a screen will show up for that player that died saying you died. Then if there's only one player remaining, then it will actually show a screen to all the clients showing the name of the player that was left alive. Now after that, the game will actually reset and the players will be taken back to the lobby where they can actually join the game again. And as you saw there, I did add the functionality to disconnect, so without further ado, let's jump right in. So the first thing we want to do is we want to actually go ahead and set up that screen that's going to show up when the player dies. So go ahead and add a new scene, and we're going to for now do a user interface, so go ahead and rename that to GUI, and then go to layout and then do full rect. Then as a child of the GUI, we're gonna go ahead and add a color rect. Then we're gonna do the exact same thing, layout, full rect, and then we're gonna go over to color on the inspector and change it to whatever color you want. I'm using a dark color for this. You can use whatever color you want. And then as another child of the GUI, I'm adding a center container, doing layout and full rect once more. And as a child of center container, I added a label. And then in the inspector, in the text, I'm gonna add some placeholder text. In this case, it's gonna say you died. And it seems a little bit small, so we're gonna actually set up a custom font. But before I actually do that, only a small number of you are actually subscribed to the channel, so make sure you hit that subscribe button, as it definitely helps the channel out and keeps me motivated to make more videos like this one. But anyway, let's actually continue. So the way I'm gonna do this is I'm actually gonna set up a font resource. So to do that, I'm actually gonna go to assets and I'm gonna create a new folder, and it's gonna be called fonts. Then I'm actually gonna import a font into this folder that I just created. So you can go ahead and actually download a font from a website such as the font like you see here, but I already have a font that I want to use, so I'm just gonna simply open it in my file explorer, and then I'm gonna click and drag it into the fonts folder that I just made to actually import it into Godot. Now I should actually have my font there, and we do, so I have all the Lotto fonts. And then what I'm going to do is I want to right click and then do new resource, and in the search I want to search for dynamic font, select that, and then I'm just going to call it font.tres. Then in the inspector I have some settings there, so I'm going to click the settings drop down and change the size to 16x4, which in this case is 64. Then I'm going to click on the font drop down, click on empty, then load. Then I'm going to go to my assets folder, my fonts folder, my Lotto folder, and then pick whatever Lotto font that I want. In this case, I'm just going to use the regular Lotto font. And that pretty much does it for the font resource. So if I go back into my label and then I go into the inspector for the label, I can click on custom fonts, empty, go back to wherever I saved that font resource that I just made and select it. And there you go, we have our font in our game. And it seems a little bit big, so I'm gonna actually go ahead and adjust it by selecting the font.tres file and changing the size there. Now you could also change it in the label, and under the custom fonts, if you actually click on font, you will have certain settings that you can adjust, such as the size and the color. It's up to you how you want your font to be. Now with that, I'm actually going to select the GUI and change the type to a pop-up. So make sure you do that. And then we can simply go ahead and save our scene. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder in the root folder and call it GUI with lowercase, and I'm also going to name the file with lowercase as well. Now what I want to go and do is I want to open up my world scene, and then with the world selected, I want to go ahead and actually instance my GUI scene that I just created, so go ahead and do that. Now you will notice that you can't actually see it, and to see it we're going to actually go ahead and add another child to the world. In this case it's going to be a canvas layer, and we're going to add the GUI as a child of the canvas layer, and now you can actually see your GUI. Now we're gonna actually go ahead and add the code that we need to actually show the pop-up that we just made to the player whenever they die. So in order to do this, I'm gonna go into my game state script, and then I'm gonna add a new function called function show GUI, and I'm actually gonna pass a parameter to it, and I'm just gonna call it status for now. You can call it whatever makes sense for you. And then I wanna do pass for now. I'm gonna go over up here and do an onReady var, and I'm gonna call it, let's just call it victory. Victory status should work, is equal to, and then the canvas GUI center container /label. Then I actually want to go ahead and add another child to the world. In this case, it's going to be an animation player. With the animation player selected, I'm going to click on animation, new, and I'm going to call it GY. Then I'm going to set it to a 3-second animation. I'm going to go over to the very beginning of the animation, click on add track, call method track, select the GUI. I'm going to right click, insert key, and I'm going to call the void pop-up centered. Then I'm going to move over to 3 seconds, and I'm going to do the exact same thing, insert key, and in this case I'm going to do the hide method. And that pretty much does it for this animation here. Now we actually want to go and call this animation from our script. So in our show GUI function, and actually before I do that, I'm going to do an onReady var animation underscore player, and then equals to $animation player to select the animation player. Then back in the show GUI function, I'm going to do animation underscore player dot play GUI. And this plays the GUI animation that we just made. And then we want to do victory status dot text is equal to the status parameter that we're passing to the function. And that actually does it for that function. Now we just have to actually call it. So we're gonna call it, let's see, I'm calling the body.damage function on the enemy script. So I'm gonna actually call it in the player script and the damage function. So I'm gonna go ahead and add these lines of code here to the damage function on the player script. And actually, I'm going to copy this line of code here, and I'm going to paste it here. So getTree.getRoot.getNode world to get our world, and then I'm going to call the function that we just made. So dot show underscore GUI, and then we're going to pass the string of whatever we want the text to actually show. So in this case, I'm just going to set it to be a string of you lose, just to make sure that you actually see that it is actually in fact changing. Now, it should actually work, but before I actually try it, I'm gonna set up a onReady var here. And actually, let's just make it a very normal variable. So var world is equal to the getTree.getRoot.getNode world, and then instead of having it constantly have to type that, I can just do world. For example, in this line here, instead of doing that entire line, and then I can do the exact same thing here. So world.show GUI. Instead of writing that entire thing out, I can just set it up as a variable, and then if I run everything and test it out, it should actually work. So let me test it out here. So let's wait for an enemy to actually touch a player so that the player dies. And well, the player did die, but the screen didn't actually show up, meaning that there's an error somewhere. So let me actually check my code real fast here to make sure if I can fix that error. And actually, let's go to editor settings, scroll down to network debug, and change the remote port to something else so that we can actually see an error in the console. Now let me actually check the code here, and everything seems fine here. So let me check my enemy script, and that looks fine, but let's actually, just in case, change the body.damage and call it before we actually remove the player. And let's save that and run everything again, and we actually get an error this time. So let's see, attempt to call function get root and base null instance on a null instance. And I think it's because of this line here, the var world is equal to getTree.getRoot. So we're gonna go ahead and actually change that to an onReady var to make sure that the world is in fact already in the scene and ready. So if we actually do that and we wait for an enemy to kill us, I think it should actually work now. And it actually is showing up, so that's good. And there is a slight error that you saw there, so we're gonna take care of this in a little bit. But first, let's actually add some more code here. But yeah, like I said, everything is working, but we're gonna add a function to basically show a screen when there's only one player remaining to all the clients now. So in order to do that, I'm gonna set up a function process delta in the game state script, and then I'm gonna do an if statement. In this case, it's gonna be if players.getChildren.size is equal to 1. So if only one player is left alive, then we want to show the GUI once more, and we want to have it show this message here. So player plus, and then we're doing server.players square brackets int, and then parentheses, and inside the parentheses we're gonna do players dot get child, and we want to get the child from the players node, which is we're responding to players. And since there's only one player in there, or there should be one player, we're going to specify with 0 and then dot name. And then outside of the square brackets, we want to add another square brackets, and we're getting the player name. And that should actually get the player name for our player. Now what we want to do is we want to set up another variables to check if the game ended, so var game ended is equal to false, and then in the if statement we want to do an exclamation point game underscore ended, and then we want to set the game ended variable equal to true inside the if statement. If we actually go ahead and test this and just wait to join the game, click ready, and we're actually in the game now, and we wait for an enemy to spawn in and actually kill a player. As you can see, it will actually show the player name, and we actually forgot to actually say that the player actually won. So in the show GUI, just add this plus sign. So go ahead and add a plus sign, and then quotes, and then space 1 to actually show that the player won. Now you might have noticed a slight bug there where the you lose screen shows up on all the clients. Now in order to fix that small bug, you can add an if statement in the player script for the damage function. So if it's network master, if that's the case, we want to do world.show GUI you died, and that should only show that screen to the player that died. Now we want to actually make it so that our game can actually reset. So in order to do this, we're going to add a timer as a child of the world, and we're just renaming it to reset game. Then in the script, I want to do onReadyVar, and then let's just call it reset underscore timer is equal to the $reset game, which is the timer we just added. And then in the if statement in the process function, we want to do reset underscore timer dot start. And then basically we added the game ended is equal to true so that the timer doesn't actually constantly start. Then with these timer selector, we're going to go ahead and make it one shot and set it to a wait time of 3 seconds. That should work fine in this case. And now with that done, what we want to go ahead and actually do is set up a timeout signal for the timer and connect it to our world. And then inside the function that creates, we're going to do server.endGame, which is a function we actually haven't made yet. So in our server script, we're going to go ahead and make that function. So we're going to do function endGame parentheses, and inside this function we're going to do RPC ID call to the server. So since we're calling the server, we specify it with 1, and we're going to call the game ended function on the server. Then what I actually want to do is I want to set up a variable for the world. So var world is equal to get node, and I'm actually going to do it by just specifying the node path here. So it's going to be /root/world to get the node path of it. Then I'm going to go ahead and do if has node then world, and then if this is correct, I'm gonna do world.queueFree to remove the world from our game. Then outside the if statement, we're gonna do get tree.changeScene, and we're gonna change it to our lobby scene. So just select the lobby scene and then click and drag it into the change scene parentheses to get the node path or the scene path for it. And then we want to do network.closeConnection and then get tree.disconnect, and we want to go ahead and disconnect the connected to server signal. So go ahead and specify connected to server, then comma self, comma, and then connected OK, which is basically this signal right there. So we're just going to go ahead and disconnect that signal. Underneath that line, we're going to do get tree.set network underscore peer, and we're going to set it equal to null. So inside the parentheses, just specify it to null, and that pretty much just resets everything. Now on the server, what we want to go ahead and do is we want to set up that function that we're calling from the client. So remote function game ended, and inside that function we want to do if has node, We want to check if it has the world node, so we're going to specify the world path again, so /root/world. Inside the if statement, we're going to do get tree.get root.get and then node and then world. And then we're gonna just simply queue free it as well, because our server actually does also have the world. And then we're gonna reset our ready players to 0. And that pretty much actually does it. Now the last thing we want to do on the server is in our function player disconnected function, we want to do players dot erase, and then in the parentheses we're going to do player underscore ID, and that pretty much erases the information for our player so that it's no longer in our games. Now if we actually test everything and run everything and join the game, it should actually fully work now. So if we just wait for an enemy to kill a player here, it should actually reset the game immediately, well, after it shows which player actually won. And we actually seem to have actually gotten an error. So let's see, has node, base node. Okay, I think it's because of this line here. So it's actually taking that as an object, not a node path. So let's just go ahead and actually specify it as a node path. So we're gonna do /root/world, and it should actually work now. So if I run everything once more and join the game and click on ready and wait for an enemy to actually kill the player, any minute now. That's they're taking their sweet time, but any minute. Okay, there they are. And there's some glitches with the enemy still, but as you see there, it is actually working now, and it is actually resetting the game and taking the player back to the lobby where they can join the game again and play again. So it is working, which is good. And yeah, see, everything's working just fine. Now you might have noticed that bug there where it sometimes shows you died instead of the name of the player that actually won the game, and that's because we're actually calling the show GUI function in two places, in the player script and the game state script. So you can probably fix that by adding an if statement, so go ahead and do that if you want. I'm just gonna leave it. Now I'm gonna set up some collision layers. So I'm gonna go to project settings, scroll down and go to 2D physics and set up the first layer as the player layer, the second layer as the enemy layer, and the third layer as the world layer. And I'm gonna click close. Now I actually want to set up those layers. So with our world, in our world scene, I'm going to go ahead and select the tile map. I'm going to go over to inspector, scroll down, click on collision, and I'm going to click these three dots here and make sure that we select the world and we remove it from the player layer. And then the mass, it's not going to have any mass, so the world is actually fully set up now. Now we want to set up our player. So with the player selected, we're going to go over to collision. It's already in the right layer for the collision, and then for mass, we want it to collide with the players, the enemies, and the world. And now we just have to set up our enemy here. So go into the enemy scene, select the enemy, collision, change it to the enemy layer, and then we want it to collide with the player. We don't want it to collide with the enemy, and we want it to collide with the world. Now, with all that done, there's one last thing that I want to actually do, and that is I actually we want to add some code so that if a enemy disconnects, the enemy is actually, well, not the enemy, if a player disconnects, the player is actually removed from the game. So we're going to add this function in the game state script, and it's going to be called function delete player, and then in the parentheses it's going to be ID, and then we're just going to do players dot get node, and then we're doing str, and then parentheses, and inside there we're gonna do ID, and then dot queue free. So we're basically selecting the player there and we're queue freeing it. And then back on the server script in the player disconnected function, we're gonna actually go ahead and call that function that we just added on our game state script. So we're only gonna do this if there is a world loaded. So we're going to add an if statement. So if getTree.getRoot.hasNode world, and if that is true, then we're going to go ahead and call that function that we made in the game state. So we can just copy getTree.getRoot.getNode world, and then it's going to just be calling the function we created. So dot delete player, and we're passing the ID to it. And that pretty much does it. So now we just have to do the exact same thing on our server. So we can just copy this, and then over on the server, I can just go ahead and paste it in the player disconnected function, and just fix the indentation. And instead of ID, in this case, it's player ID. And yeah, that pretty much does it. Now I can just go back, and in the game state on the client, I can go and copy the delete player function and paste it in the game state script on the server. And that actually does it. So if I actually go ahead and test everything here, so if I join the game, and I'm actually running 3 instances here, so if I click on ready on all of them, we have 3 players. And then if I actually wait for an enemy to kill my player, any minute now, come on, you got it, buddy. Alright, well, there we go. That player died, and it does show the you died screen to it. And then once there's 1 player remaining, it does in fact show who won the game. It resets the game, where you can join the game once more, and if a player disconnects, as you saw there, the player is actually deleted from the game. So everything is actually working. Now, I should mention that this game is definitely not bug-free. In fact, it does have quite a few bugs that could use some fixing, but I'm not going to be worrying about that too much, since the game is in fact actually working and functioning. And since the goal of this tutorial series was not actually to show you how to create a fully optimized bug-free game, but rather to show you the process of how you can create a pretty fast and rough prototype of a multiplayer game. So with that, that pretty much does it for this tutorial series. Now, it's not the last video. I am actually going to be releasing a couple of bonus videos in the next couple of weeks, showing you how to add additional functionality to the game, such as giving the player the ability to choose what color they want the player to be, chat system, and other things such as that. So definitely look forward to that. Now, with that said, I am going to actually leave a link to the assets that I used and to the GitHub project in the description. And if you liked the video, make sure you leave a like and consider subscribing. And as always, I'll see you guys in the next one.